once I figured this out, it made me a happy person.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dropping Knowledge podcast. I'm honored to have Bryan Heller on with me today. Bryan, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Angelo.
Of course, Bryan's been like a mentor to me. He's taught me a lot of lessons in business and life, and I'm grateful to have him on because every time we talk, it's always valuable stuff. So I'm happy to capture it and share it with you guys. So, founder of the ATAC App, CEO of the ATAC App, co-founder of ClaimScore, and I can't go on and name all the ventures, but Bryan, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and what you have going on.
Cool. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I appreciate the brief intro there. I enjoy our conversations as well. I think you know that as we go through and discuss business, that's my passion for sure. So I'm happy to rap about it whenever we get on the phone. It's a good time. So yeah, my path to here wasn't exactly straight. I don't think many entrepreneurs have like a direct path towards where they found success. So backing up to college, I studied recreation, park, and tourism management, which I joke is my wife calls underwater basket weaving or college for dummies. She was the electrical engineer. I was the D1 wrestler focused really on trying to win a national title, which unfortunately didn't happen for me, but that's what every D1 athlete's chasing. So I studied recreation, park, and tourism management. Didn't know what to do. I took an internship at an engineering firm doing environmental consulting. This was back in 2007. They had a full-time job open up, and I hopped on the opportunity. And in that first job, I realized that everything I learned from wrestling would translate to the workforce. You know, the setting a schedule, coming up with an objective, and then doing all the right things to reach that goal was something that like I had built my entire life around. So it helped me find quick and early success in that career. So quickly, I started to make headway. I became a project coordinator, then a project manager. There was an opportunity to lead a technical discipline group in that company, so I sidestepped from environmental to landfill gas to energy, which is like a renewable energy market. And then I had the opportunity to run business development. It was mostly like internal cross-selling. So I helped like 16 different teams work together, share information about their clients, and figure out how ultimately we could help each other cross-sell our own services. While I was there, the entrepreneurial spirit in me was building. I wanted to do something. I wanted to go out on my own and branch off and not just work for a company and help them grow, but do something that I could have ownership over. And I started to explore, and for several years, I was trying to figure out what that journey would look like for me. And you know, the obvious solution was just do what I was doing in that industry, but for myself, right? So start my own small boutique consulting engineering firm and try to grow and build that. And I explored that avenue, and I thought about business, and I thought, why do you go into business? One, you want to, control your own destiny, but two, you ultimately want to sell that business and make a profit. So I started to reshape how I thought about business, not just like as a lifestyle or how I can build, my personal income on a yearly basis, but business as an asset. And I want to sell this asset at some point. And when that switch flipped in my head, I started looking at how businesses were valued, right? So what an engineering firm would sell for versus what other types of businesses would sell for. And I got into software because software historically or as of lately as well has sold for a lot bigger multiples. So just to dive a little bit into the math, like a consulting engineering firm might trade on EBITDA, which is one way to value a company, 3 to 5x EBITDA, and that's what the company is worth. In software, it's a multiple of gross revenue. So 10 to 50 gross is a much more appealing metric. So, again, if you did $1 million in business and consulting engineering, 30% margin, put a 3 on that, your business is only worth about $1 million. Where if you're doing $1 million gross in software and your margin is 0 or 30%, doesn't really matter, and you put a 5 or 50 on it, your business is worth 5 million or 50 million. So I said, all right, for the same amount of revenue, I can go much, much further on the sale of a business through software. The only thing I really knew about was training. I'd coached athletes for 15 years while I was pursuing this career in consulting engineering, and I learned a ton about athlete optimization. I took a sports nutrition certification program. I was helping kids with their strength training, on the mat, mental side of things, added nutrition to it, and partnered with Nick Roy, who I know you have a close relationship with. We founded ATAC on some of the principles that I had discovered through this, continuing ed process that I was going on. Started as a whiteboard class. We taught it in Triumph. Had everyone sit down for an hour for 8 weeks in a row and taught the principles on a whiteboard. And after that class, it was really well received, and all the kids had like one major takeaway. One person really loved all the nutrition advice, and that helped them excel. One athlete had the strength training, and that helped them excel. Lots of kids thought the mental side of things was really important. And Nick and I got together and said, hey, if we can create an app that actually walked kids through this process, not just taught them about the concepts, but like something that they can hold and follow, that would be a
Wow.
huge
So it wasn't
impact.
even an app before you brought it to the whiteboard.
Correct. It was a
Wow.
curriculum. We just like I wanted to teach this class
I
because it
know
was
that.
important to me. Yep. Not a lot of people know. I mean, there's like, we did 2 classes of this, like 2 years in a row, and there's probably less than 20 over more than 10 kids in each group. So those kids and parents knew about this, but aside from that, we kept it pretty quiet.
Wow.
Yeah, so after the app, I mean, still working on that business. One of my lead investors in that company is my co-founder in ClaimScore. So he's a class action attorney, saw fraud as a major problem in that space, asked if I could come up with a solution to solve it using software, and we built like a proof of concept, launched a closed beta product, and that's been exploding since then. So yeah, not a straight path, but here we are.
No, but it's funny how through the path eventually it leads you to what you wanted to do, be an entrepreneur and do all the things that you've learned through those experiences and, make a successful business and make some money. And did you know right away when you were out of college that entrepreneurship would be your goal, or through working with these companies and consulting, you, like you said, started to get that entrepreneurship urge?
Yeah, good question. I mean, when I entered into Penn State, I obviously was hyper focused on wrestling. I started my studies in kinesiology, which is like sports and the movement of the body. And there was several different tracks in kines, one of which was physical education. So I was kind of gearing towards I'm going to go teach phys ed and be a wrestling coach, and that was
Hmm.
how my life was going to shape up. I switched majors between my freshman and sophomore year to recreation, park, and tourism management. I joked I gave it some funny names earlier, but it really is a business centric major. So we had marketing classes, management classes, accounting classes, finance classes. I took econ. But then there was other things like recreation law. There was nonprofit administration, just like kind of every different avenue of the business of recreation. So although it wasn't like traditional business, it was business focused on recreational activities. So once I started doing that, I caught the bug, right? Everyone around me was kind of thinking the same thing. In one of my 400 level management classes, we had to write a business plan and come up with like how we would fund it, build a business model, and like how we would operate this business. And we did it in a group. Really cool learning experience. I found myself like leading a lot of those team discussions. Just I was excited about it, and after that, I thought maybe I'll get into the surf industry. I was surfing at the time, and right after I graduated college, I like traveled around the world. Actually, I went to Bali and Nicaragua and Jamaica and yeah, where else? Portugal,
Wow.
the Pacific Northwest, all over the place. And I thought maybe that was the industry I would get into. I took a marketing internship with a nonprofit called Surf Aid International. They had actually offered me a full-time job, which I declined to go to Bali for 6 weeks back in '07. But yeah, so I wasn't sure what the entrepreneurial journey would look like, but I definitely caught the bug between my freshman and sophomore year in college.
How important do you think traveling was for you? Has that opened your mind, all the traveling?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, I came from a pretty affluent area, Rumson, Fairhaven. My parents did well. They gave me a great upbringing, and because of that, you're kind of sheltered to a degree to what the world's problems are. And I was lucky to come up in that environment and go to college and with a good group of people and have a really good support system. But traveling was like absolutely mandatory for me. I had traveled with my team at Penn State just like around, and you kind of get your feet wet and like navigating airports and like dealing with shitty itineraries and missed flights and canceled flights and long bus rides and all that stuff kind of built this desire for me to go travel on my own. So when I went to Indonesia, it wasn't exactly planned this way, but the way it worked out is I went solo, and I had a connection there who I had never met. This is '07, so no smartphones, no, like, I'm still on dial-up internet back then. And I had just had a phone that operated in Bali. So when I landed in Bali, I called him and said, hey, I know who I am, and I know who you are. Can I come stay with you for a couple of days while I find a place? He welcomed me in. He was teaching English there and living in the city of Denpasar, which is Bali. Everyone thinks of the beaches. I was like 30 minutes from the beach in the heart of a city,
Wow.
in the middle of Southeast Asia. I spoke no Bahasa Indonesian. I just kind of thrusted myself in there. He said, yeah, come stay with me, but tomorrow morning I leave for 3 days, so you're going to be on your own, like, right quick. So immediately I like found myself in this city, which is, Indonesia was the largest Muslim country by population. This is not that long after 9/11. The war on terror is significant at this moment in time. So
Mm.
Muslims and Americans didn't exactly get along. In Bali, it's Hindu, so it was a little lighter tension. But I was for sure the only dude with blonde hair and blue eyes walking around Denpasar, and everyone stared at me, right? So it was the first time that I realized what it felt like to be an outsider and feel like an outsider. And I had all but good experiences. I did not have any real bad experiences. But it's when everyone is staring at you, and like, I'm not talking like, oh, just peek at that guy, like head turning as I'm walking the street, every head
Yeah.
is turning towards me. You feel that, right? And it's not a negative thing, but it's unsettling because you're like, I so don't fit in here that if someone wanted to take advantage of the situation, they could, and it would be team everyone versus me. And that was like a really, really eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, traveling will do that to you. It'll put you in experiences and environments where you have never been there before, and it makes you think in different ways. Definitely
Yeah.
eye-opening.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you a funny story. I have a couple funny stories from every one of these trips, and the one, I took the same taxi drivers from the city to the beach in the morning. It was this group of guys who all hung out at the local grocery store. There's four of them. I was there for 6 weeks, so I got to know who they were, and I would take them to the beach, and then from the beach back, I would just find a random taxi driver to take me. But then the shift that was waiting at that grocery store was a different shift in the morning. So the night shift, I didn't know anyone. And one day I'd left my cell phone in the taxi that
Oh,
drove me from the beach to the city. And again, no smartphones. I didn't even have a laptop with me. Like, that was my only communication with people here. And then I would go to the internet cafe to email people, which is such a funny concept in 2025. But nonetheless, that was like my connection to anyone. So I walked back to the taxi stand and asked the guy, and no, I had no way to speak to him. He had no way to speak to me. I just went mobile. I lost my mobile. And he was like, mobile, mobile? And I was like, yeah, I lost my mobile. He's like, mobile. So he gets on the phone, he speaks Indonesian, and he just waves to me, mobile, mobile. And I get in the car, and we start leaving the city, and we start
damn.
driving into the jungle, and I'm like, I'm fucking dead. There's no way that this was a good idea. He doesn't have the meter
Oh
running.
my
I'm
God.
just driving into the jungle with some random guy that I have no idea who he is, where he is. We can't speak. So we start driving, and like 10 minutes in, I'm like, mobile? And he's like, yeah, mobile, mobile. All right, I'm sitting in the back of this car.
Dude,
10 minutes, 20 minutes later. Now, I don't have a watch on. I don't have a phone. I have no concept of time either. I'm just like in the back of the car
how old are you?
driving into the jungle. I was 23.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow.
Fresh off a college wrestling,
Yeah.
career. So I was kind of like a lot stockier than I am now. I felt confident, but like, when there's guns and machetes involved, I knew I didn't stand a chance. So,
I feel you.
40 minutes later, we pull up to this row, and it's cinder block building. So just think about cinder blocks stacked, no windows, a door every like 20 feet in the cinder block building. And I'm thinking, this is it. Like, this can't be good at all.
Damn.
So I get out of the car, and next thing you know, the taxi driver with my phone opens one of those doors
Way.
and is going, mobile, and like shaking my phone in the air. And I'm like, no way. So I run up to the guy. He hands me the phone. I am thanking them, and I give them each what's equivalent to like $50 US at the time,
Wow.
right?
At the time, it's
These guys made $20 a month US. So it was more than 2 months salary for both. One guy dropped to his knees and was like, I can't, no, 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 no. And I was like, you're taking this. Please take this money, right? So they got the money. I got back in the car. They drove me back to the city and no problems. But it's one of those things where you learned like that could have gone two ways. And if it went the other way, I'm not sitting here telling the funny story. So your situational awareness builds through experiences like that. And it was a huge learning moment for me. Unfortunately, I made the mistake a couple other times in different trips, but like every trip you go on, you learn about yourself, you learn about just surviving, communication, self-preservation, all of those things. It's just like it's an experience that I recommend everyone have for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely the best life skill teacher right there,
Yeah.
traveling. I want to go back to environment. Obviously, being in the Penn State room, you're surrounded by a bunch of killers, and it's tough to be weak in that environment. How important do you think environment is in business too, in life, to surround yourself with the right environment to ultimately perform at your best?
Yeah. I think the right environment's a grayscale, and I think there's nothing too black and white about this. And different people have different tolerances for suffering, right? And it's a balance between being pushed enough to reach your potential, but not being overly pushed where you get cooked and quit, right? And I think that's like, Penn State, I showed up, I was seventh in the state of New Jersey twice, which was good in hindsight. I was happy with that in hindsight. It was good to place twice. But in that room, it was all state champs, right? And like I was on the lower tier of the room for sure. It wasn't until years later I was like, I think they recruited me to be like a practice dummy because I worked exceptionally hard, but I didn't really have the accolades as everyone else. I didn't score a takedown for like 6 weeks. I didn't get out on bottom for like 6 weeks. I didn't score a single point in any position for a good 6 weeks.
Wow.
And then I found my way, right? I had a couple good open tournaments. Cleveland State Open was the first one I did well in. I started to grow in that space. And then ultimately the next year I knocked off a Pennsylvania State champ to start. And I was the fill-in for the returning national finalist who graduated. So ahead of me in line, my true freshman year was the guy who finished second in the NCAAs, and behind him was the guy from Russia who knocked off the other guy in the university, so the freestyle national championship. So both guys were 1 and 2 in the country, and having those guys as practice partners was amazing. But in our incoming freshman class of 10 or 15, only I think 4 of us made it to graduation and still on the team, right? So it was just like really hard environment, and that was pretty typical of like incoming freshman classes at a D1 wrestling program. A lot of kids get cooked and burned out and don't make it through. But that environment taught me I was resilient enough to deal with the suffering early on, and then it taught me how to be successful and find a way to win essentially. So yeah, I think the environment is super important, but I think that balance is important too. And same goes in business. People are ready for different opportunities at different phases of life. If you got thrust into like a giant opportunity that was too big for what your experience was, it might not go well, and you might like think, man, if the timing was better, I would have done a better job. So there's just like a really interesting grayscale of environment meets tolerance. If that makes
Exactly.
sense.
For sure. And I like what you said about like finding wrestling forced you to kind of find a way through that adversity, and it's obviously translated into your business life because I know you're a very hard worker, but it's tough to kind of find like that skill without going through hardships and adversity that will like push you to see what you really have, you know?
Yeah.
So when you build your business, I know you're obviously a very smart person and you've educated me on kind of building systems and how to operate things to make them work well. What's your mindset like when you build those systems? Like, what are you looking for? How do you optimize your business to make everything run efficiently? Just elaborate more on that whole idea.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that upfront planning is hypercritical, right? Like you should know what you're trying to accomplish, and there's different phases of that. So in software, it's product based, right? So if you're doing services or consulting, your product is different. What you're selling is different. So first off, knowing what you're selling is critical. Knowing who your audience is critical. understanding that go-to-market strategy. So how are you going to put this product in front of this market is critical. And then knowing the economics behind it. What's my cost going to be to deliver my product? Not just the product itself, but that go-to-market expense. So marketing, advertising, events, what goes into that, meeting of product and client. But then the other part of it is being able to show up on the line of scrimmage and call an audible, because it never really goes to plan. You need a plan. You can't not have a plan. But when you start executing the plan, rarely is that plan exactly right. So understanding all right, I'm going to have to make critical decisions and pivot here and there to make sure I can actually advance the company objectives. I am a huge advocate for relying on data. I mean, that's I built my businesses off of data, right? So, the strength training aspects of ATAC are based on large data sets, and we're using math and algorithms to, give weights and reps and sets to our athletes. And I think business is really simple in that sense. You look at when you put dollars into a certain sales channel or to a certain marketing avenue, are you seeing the response that you need from those customers? But then on the product side, is the product landing with your customers? There's a concept called product market fit that's the holy grail of software. If you look into software, that's all financial institutions, institutional investors are all talking about PMF, product market fit. And it's really all right, does your product solve the need of your client and at such a rate where you're expanding growth almost organically, right? So if you put that product in front of a customer, they see it, they gravitate toward it, they use it, it solves a problem, they tell other people about it, and your growth can accelerate. That's a really hard concept. It's really hard to know if you found product market fit or not. But again, generally just reviewing the data, being reflective, looking back at P&Ls, figuring out, these nuances of where you can pivot. Also seeing the market, being in the forefront. And ClaimScore specifically, I'm at all these events. We're a thought leader in the space. We're the leading fraud detection solution in complex litigations. We're expanding the offering to other data science solutions. But going to different events and hearing our prospective clients talk about the struggles that they're having and how they're solving those problems turns gears in my head, and I'm able to see 365 days ahead of time. All right, I see a trend of this problem emerging. No one really understands the problem because they're not saying, oh, the problem is X, Y, and Z, but they're circling around the problem, and I can see the correlation amongst all these 5 different players describing a similar issue that they're having. So I'm thinking of ways that we can productize a solution to it even before they've fully identified the problem. And then we're marketing the problem. So we're saying fraud is a huge problem. Where everyone knew fraud was a big problem, but it wasn't until we pushed it to the forefront where every administrator, every lawyer was going back and are we experiencing fraud? Holy shit, we are experiencing a lot of fraud. It was kind of just blind. They were blind to it a little bit, but we created this industry wave, and we're doing it again. It's exciting.
That's awesome, but it shows how important listening to your ICP is
Yeah.
and seeing between the lines, because you literally just could see something that they're struggling with. They don't know it yet, but they're gonna, and then you market that, and it's just a light bulb goes off in their head.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up the term ICP. It's something that we've talked about, right? And that's the ideal customer profile, right? So finding, and a lot of the stuff that you and I talk about is service level, like consulting or advising. And I love that industry too. My consulting engineering career for 13 years was consulting, right? The product wasn't a product per se. It was what we were selling, which was our time and knowledge and experience. And the ICP is so critical because as you put together your messaging, you want to know, am I talking to men, women? What age group are they in? What interests do they have? What is going to resonate with them? And really understanding that persona is as critical as a step as possible, because I see way too many people say, all right, I'm going to do consulting and it's relevant for anyone who is 15 to 75 and likes pizza, right? Whatever the weird oddity is that you're doing, right? But if it's so broad, it's really tough to use language that resonates across that whole audience. So if you're targeting a much more, smaller niche audience, you're able to resonate with that audience better. And so for ATAC, let's talk about that. We specifically made a decision to target the athletes themselves early on. We could have chose parents, we could have chose coaches, we chose athletes, and we went to market with messaging that resonated with athletes. We knew that athletes were going to watch our Instagram videos, they were going to read the posts. That's the audience that was going to read our messaging. And you talk to that audience much differently than you talk to parents of that audience.
Exactly.
Right? And then we were building out channels and said, well, we do need to market to the parents as well. Maybe when we market on Facebook, we should use slightly different language than when we market on Instagram, because you can hit two different ICPs very specifically. ClaimScore, similarly, we sell to administrators, which are intermediaries in lawsuits. We sell to the lawyers themselves. We're also trying to educate the judiciary, so the judges. And when we're putting out marketing materials, we talk internally like, who is going to watch this video? Who's going to read this caption? Who's going to read this blog? Who's going to download this ebook? And we make sure that the messaging resonates with that customer profile. And it shifted a little bit. We had more success going in this avenue, so we started to shift our messaging to focus on that ICP as opposed to the other one. So it's super critical. And like I said earlier, you kind of have to learn and pivot and pick and choose. And I know you're really good about being observant in that too. You've told me, just based on the feedback you're getting from the stuff that you're putting out there, you're starting to figure out who you resonate best with. And that's the feedback you want to evaluate on some frequency, whether it's monthly or quarterly or whatever the cadence is best for your business, and figure out, all right, am I hitting my ICP? Is my ICP a little different? Will I find product market fit if I go in this direction a little bit? And just being mobile a little bit.
Exactly. Well said. Obviously, marketing is a huge part of business. What do you think are the core fundamental marketing skills and ideas that everybody should know if they want to run a successful business?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think in between as I was full time in ATAC and now I'm more full time in ClaimScore, the in between was I worked at a marketing agency called Splendor Design and Red Bank. Those guys are great. They're co-founders in ATAC, so they're vested in that business as well. And they taught me a lot about the power of a brand. And I was interested in that stuff, but Chris Brignola specifically and I had a meeting. I call it a meeting. I'm going to use air quotes. It was essentially, I had finished up a practice at Triumph. I was in my wrestling shoes still, sitting next to Chris, who his sons, Max and Tyler, were in the next session, and I wasn't coaching that session. But I sat with him for like 40 minutes, and we were talking about branding. And at that point in time, I really didn't understand what branding meant, but it's everything about your business, from the colors, the logo, the way that you speak, right? The voice that your brand has, to everything around it. That ties to outbound marketing, to your website, the inbound stuff. There's just a ton that goes behind a brand, and the power of a brand, that can resonate beyond just those marketing. So it's an ethos that people can feel. It's really hard to describe that without sounding a little pretentious there, right? The ethos of a brand is hard to articulate. But at that time, I mean, they do phenomenal work, and they had worked with some pretty big companies and doing some really big brand exploration work. And I got to be in on those conversations and contribute from a strategy perspective. So I think having that foundational brand is critical, and then building a strategy around it, whether that's very tactical. We're going to use this channel, LinkedIn, a newsletter, whatever the case is, a blog. And then what content are you going to deliver on that channel? So that's one aspect of strategy. But the other aspect of strategy is the story that you're perpetually going to tell over time, right? So ATAC, we had champions aren't born, they're made, was the beginning of this. And that was an awesome thing because it resonated with me personally too. I told you I went to Penn State. I basically got my ass kicked for a while before I I won a college open my senior year and was ranked in the top 20. So you feel there isn't this, you're not at a destination, it's a process, right? So champions aren't born, they're made was ATAC is here to build you into the champion that you will be, not just you are already a champion or you are not. But then we had to build a whole strategy around that concept. So like every video that we did, every piece of marketing that we did, like touched back on that concept. And it's evolved. I mean, we had trained like a wrestler for a while. We had like some other things that we've done over time. But so strategy is both tactical, but then like storytelling as well. And then again, just like meeting your customers where they are. So like if you try to do an email campaign to high school kids, probably not a great idea, right? And if you try to do a TikTok campaign to people that are north of 50, probably not going to be a great idea. So figuring out where your customers consume content is critical. If they like videos, do they like 5-second videos or 3-minute videos? You know, at ClaimScore, we market to lawyers. They would prefer a 3-minute video over a 30-second video. There's just not enough substance in a 30-second video for them to like get a handle on what you're trying to portray. So we shoot for longer form. But at ATAC, it was always like, how can we make this video shorter? Because no one has the attention to watch a 3-minute video. So just meeting your customers where you are, and ultimately all those ingredients in the soup stirred the right way will make a successful campaign.
I love that. That's good advice. And then marketing is one side of the business, and then sales is obviously the other. Let's do the same thing with sales. Give me some of your best sales game or sales strategies.
Yeah. Whoops. Knocked my headphones out. I think the mistake people make is that sales and marketing are the same thing. And people have a really hard time with drawing a firm line. And I talked about grayscale before. There's a little crossover, but there should be a direct line in the sand where like, here's our sales activity and here's our marketing activity. And they support each other, right? But when you're trying to close someone, it's much more than sending them an informatory email, right? So I think like consultative sales is a big thing that's worked for me, and being a true expert has helped me close business easily. I don't want to say easily, but because everything is a challenge. But for the most part, my co-founder Don and I are exceptionally, skilled. Again, he's got 25, 30 years of class action experience. I've dove super deep into this fraud thing. So when the two of us get on a call, we can talk about fraud and class action lawsuits better than anyone else currently in the space. So being able to walk through all of the ups and downs of fraud, explaining the nuances, the types of fraud, which is complex, how we're able to spot fraud, what evidence we give to these customers so they can like buy into our solution. That educational process has been like a really good way for me to land sales. And the way I think about it is I want to be a resource, and we don't charge by hour, right? We're not a consulting agency. We charge for analyzing data. So like I'm your free resource. If you have a thing that comes up, one of your administrative partners is dealing with fraud, it's not really up to your standard, you want to bring me in, I'll talk to them. I'll do whatever has to happen so you feel good about this. Even if it doesn't lead to us getting any business, I'm okay with that. But then on the next go around, when a fraud comes up, they're going to know that they should come to us, right? So you just become this thought leader. And that's where the marketing side puts you on the stage at an event, right? Our marketing program involves thought leadership opportunities. So I will talk at conferences about fraud. But then I walk off the stage and meet people, right? And when I meet people, I take their business card or we exchange LinkedIn's, and then the sales effort starts. Okay, there's a certain cadence for follow-up. I want to track the case. If it's a lawyer, I kind of want to know about their docket, what cases they're filing, what places they're walking, like what avenues of the law they're exploring, whether it's data privacy or consumer stuff or antitrust or what are those different aspects. And then I learn more about that so I can be a better resource. When I call them, I'm not just like, hey, can you give me any business? It's like, hey, what's going on with your cases? Is there anything coming up that we should be aware of? Like just understanding their sales cycle so that I fit in, as opposed to just like, hey, I want to sell. That's not, it usually doesn't work that well. But look, I think like leveraging partnerships is critical. I think that's helped us scale at ClaimScore big time. We have some, Don has practiced law with people who need our services. So there's a long-term business relationship that they've already built through the practice of law that's given us credibility, and we've leveraged that for some substantial partnerships. And those go beyond just like one-off transactional opportunities. I'm not just like reviewing fraud for one case. We have like, one of our biggest partners is Western Alliance Bank and digital disbursements. They they distribute a lot of money in class actions, and they know there's a fraud problem out there. So they've partnered with us. We've gone to market together. They've made a commitment to us. We made a commitment to them. We won an award together. We won the American Banker Innovation of the Year for cybersecurity and fraud, which is, again, I had no idea what that even was 5 years ago. And we're on the stage for the American Banker Awards, which was a crazy experience back in July. But nonetheless, like, partnerships are critical. And any way that you can leverage existing relationships to build partnerships, I recommend. And the other thing is, like, don't get greedy. There's people want to maximize value all the time. And if you're a salesperson, you want to maximize how much you're selling. And if you're commission based, obviously you want to push those dollar values. But I always think about it as like an investment in a relationship. And I'm happy to bend over and make concessions so that we can build this relationship. You can build trust in me, I can build trust in you, and then ultimately it's all going to work out. And the last thing, like Don and I always tell people, we're in the business of selling value, and if there's no value, I'm not going to waste your time. So if you just tell me, hey, we don't have a need for your service, no problem. I'm going to go find someone who does. We know that our service brings a ton of value in the right circumstance. So I don't need to sell it to someone who's not going to find value. There's plenty of opportunities where you can drive value. And I think just like that's how you build overall industry trust, is if you rely on true value. And if you're always providing true value, then there's something that someone will pay you for that value every time. So yeah, it's not, I don't have like a magic recipe for cold calling. That's not the way I've done it. I know like a lot of people have amazing sales scripts and they cold call 20 people a day, and based on that funnel they're able to drive opportunities, which means an intro meeting, and the purpose of that intro meeting is to get a closing meeting, and they just have a funnel that they work a little differently. This is a little different, and that works for a lot of industries, but we found like these big partnerships have come through building trust and relationships, and that's helped us scale fast.
For sure. And I like what you said about those relationships, because if you just provide the value and you want to be an educator, if someone doesn't need your service right now, it is a long-term game to the point where that person might need your service or product in their future, and they remember that you just educated them, and that's a wise way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, ATAC is much different, right? So this is not one-to-one sales.
No.
Business to business, much different than direct to consumer. D2C is different than B2B. And in ATAC, it was building that funnel, but that was all automated and digital. So we launched like a coaching platform, and we built an email automation system to pull coaches through a funnel and ultimately have them schedule a demo with us. And that worked great. I mean, there's all different things. On the consumer side, it was all like an advertising funnel, like pushing people to the app store, getting them to download the app, targeting them with push notifications, having free trials. Like all that was way different, and there's a different strategy for that altogether. But yeah, sales is I think there's no one size fits all. You got to look at your opportunities and like think about your ICP. Who am I selling to? How am I going to drive value, and then build that into your sales cycle, and that'll be a winning strategy.
For sure. Well said. As you scale this business that you're in now, compared to when you first started as a startup, how do you go about scaling to like get those high numbers, and how do you have to reform your business and balance all of that stuff? What's that experience like?
It's deep reflection often. Like you don't always win, and when you do, you can't always celebrate, right? There's always more work to be done. But it's funny. We have our quarterly board meeting for ClaimScore is next Tuesday, so it's coming up. And last night I started putting our board deck together, and a lot of that's financial information, and it's a lot of year over year or quarter over quarter comparisons. So it's like, where was I at Q3 of 24 versus Q3 of 25, and then also what did Q1 through 3 24 look like, and what did Q1 through 3 25 look like? And I talked about data earlier, like the numbers don't lie. And there was decisions that we made. And so we raised seed capital in 2024 in March from Rock Venture Group, great guys. Dave and Aaron are on our board at ClaimScore, and they've been helpful for us. But, we had early conversations with them about our direction, and we were still trying to find our way. We took seed capitals pretty early. You don't have everything figured out at that time. And one of the things that they told Don over and over and over again is like, don't rush for a couple $1,000,000 this year in sales. Build a sustainable business that's going to drive like big value in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's why we raised capital, because we could take risks. It lessened the burden on our operations. So we didn't have to be like cash positive at the time. We had capital that we generated through an investment, which we sold part of our company for. And then we were able to build scalable systems without the pressure of cash flow. And so I for that, seed capital is amazing. And that advice was helpful. We were able to look at opportunities and say like, all right, this is a loss on our balance sheet. We're going to lose money by doing this, but the trust that we're going to gain in this customer is going to pay us forward. And there was like 3 really critical decisions that I'm not going to get into the specifics, but 3 really critical things that we did through that year that all came to fruition this year, right? And so between last year and this year, we 4x'd our revenue, and that was really because we laid groundwork in that first 6 months of 2024, and it started to play.
Without the financial pressure, your mind goes more freely because you could take those risks, right?
Yep, exactly. We were able to keep our team happy and employed. We were able to buy the data that we needed to make our product better, and we could essentially take risks and opportunities that we were so new to the market. This fraud detection thing was so new to the market. And when a case is like way down the road and there's no more budget for new, right? They settled the case in 2023. They put a bucket of money in an account, and that was the entire amount of money for this case. We're coming in like mid 2024. There's no money for us. So it was like, hey, we'll just do it for free to solve this huge headache for you. And we'll provide consultation through the whole process and write declarations, which is a legal document. And then every case after that, they brought us in, right? So that case, on 2 parties in that, actually all 3 parties, the defense, the plaintiffs, and the administrator, all used us at a big way in 2025. So like that, it should have been 6 figures in business. We walked from 6 figures in business, but then it became 7 figures in business the next year. So like, it's hard to scale, and you have to make good decisions. And this year we had a different approach. In 2025, we're cash positive. We have net profit that we're operating under. We're building an operating budget that's sustainable, and we don't want to get into the VC cycle, which is like you need to raise another round every 12 to 18 months. Otherwise, your company doesn't have the operating capital to survive. And a lot of companies have done that, and they've been exceptionally successful. If you think of like in the fitness space, I know more about a Peloton, Whoop. Those companies weren't profitable. They were taking a new Series A, B, C, D, E raise every year. They IPO'd, and they IPO'd for a lot of money, right? And it worked for them. But Don and I kind of build this business kind of in the middle. And the conference I was at last week is called the Legal Tech Fund, and the managing director of that is Zach Posner, and he is exceptionally smart. He has an amazing perspective on the legal technology space. Really like watching him or listening to him speak, and we've had several meetings with him, and every time I feel a little enlightened afterwards. And he told us like early on, you guys have to decide whether you want to be a VC-backed company, which is like, hey, burn all the cash that you have and try to grow as fast as you possibly can with a certain amount of risk, or you can be an operator who is capital efficient and actually build a profitable business. And then there's somewhere kind of in between. And Don and I play in the in between. We're aggressive to a degree, but we're conservative enough. We're capital efficient to build a profitable business at the same time. And I think everyone kind of needs, especially in software, you kind of need to know which of those you are. Are you like super capital efficient where you don't want to take any risks and you need like a year's worth of money on your balance sheet at all times? Or do you want to be somewhere in the middle? Or do you want to be burning cash at a rate that's not sustainable and you're just kind of betting the house every month on future growth? And, we found our way kind of right in the middle there. But scaling, you got to take risks to a degree. And you can hedge those risks with funding or with partnerships. There's all different ways.
For sure. When I first got into business, I was always thinking that it's just something you have your whole life and you try to keep growing it and take on more employees. But what you said about building it to sell it, also changed my whole perspective because now it's like a game kind of. Like you
Yeah.
just have to be strategic from the start. And I think when you start that company, you know eventually you want to build to scale it or to sell it. Um, so I have a couple questions. Number one, how do you go about valuing a company, like putting a price tag on a company to sell it? I guess it's based on revenue and all that stuff. And
Yeah, so each sector has different valuation metrics, and I kind of touched about this in when I was talking about my experience. And ChatGPT has some good answers on best practices, but it's going to be who buys you, right? So there's a couple things to consider. One, what are you selling? Two, who's going to buy you? And if you think about why they're buying you, that'll unlock some key things. So let's just go with a couple fictitious scenarios. Private equity is pretty standard financial institution that buys businesses, right? So like there's all different phases of financing. Venture capital is typically like a risk, risk, risk. They buy less than 20% of your business or 20% or less of your business, and they're growing you for a final exit, usually either an IPO or to a private equity somewhere down the line. And each time you raise capital, you have to value your business, right? So there's like a math equation you have to do. In a traditional business, it might be like a mom and pop shop, right? You're a marketing agency, you want to scale it up to a certain level and sell it to private equity. Private equity is likely doing one of a couple things. One, they are going to merge several companies with adjacencies, and the sum of those parts are going to deliver higher than individually. So let's say we have a creative shop and we have an ads agency, and the ads agency is like really good at placing media and getting responses, and the creative shop is really good with brand strategy and top level creative, but doesn't have the ad strategy, and the ad company doesn't have the creative strategy. If a PE group were to buy and merge those two companies together, in theory, them combined should be more than 1 + 1 = 2, right? Because they both have sales channels, they can upsell each other's clients, but then them working collectively would open a much broader door. Maybe they can reach higher levels. They have more capital to spend on marketing. Like they're going to pump money in, but private equity wants to resell your business 3 to 5 years later, right? So if they bought your business for $10 million now, in 3 to 5 years, they want to sell that business for 3 to 5, so 30 to 50 million, right? And that's like their model for making money. So they need a business that's capital efficient, it's a good business, it's low risk, but they can see the gaps in your operations where they can fill those gaps, maybe roll you with another company, maybe just put a network over you. Like, hey, we have connection to all these top brands. Like the private equity group might work with Volcom and Nike and all these companies, and they say, hey, if we plug you into this network, you can sell into our network, and we're immediately going to triple your bottom line, and then we can sell your company in 3 to 5 years for a multiple. So private equity is going to look at that and say, all right, for me, I'm going to sell your business again, and I know that the buyers of that business will be X, Y, and Z. They're going to pay X, Y, and Z, and I'll reverse the math back and say, all right, for me to get a 3X in your business, the most I can spend is this. And then they'll look at your revenue and your profitability and your EBITDA and say like, all right, common theme. I'm going to look at your EBITDA, which is a little more complicated way of saying profit, which is it's like earnings before interest, distributions, tax, and one more thing I'm spacing. But anyway, so it's like it's a rough number of profit essentially. Not final profit, but like a staged profit. But if you're 3 times your profit, that's going to be what we pay you. And then again, we're going to try to triple your profit and triple the sale later. If you go IPO, it's much different. You're going to public markets, market perception. There's so much that goes into it. And then if you go to a strategic, right? So let's say that a big agency wants to buy a creative shop because they own a sector of the marketplace. So let's say like one creative agency works with commercial developers. So like Splendor did a lot of work with commercial developers. And let's say they did a lot of work with commercial developers in the New York, New Jersey region. So Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Hoboken, right? And Jersey City. And they worked with all these developers and they had this really niche service. And now you have a big nationwide agency that has a footprint in New York, LA, Miami, all these different cities in between, Pittsburgh, St. Louis.
Nationwide.
Yeah, nationwide. And like, man, if we took the resume of this company in New York, New Jersey, and applied it to our presence in all these other cities, we could win so much business in all those places. And we have the infrastructure. We have the boots on the ground to do the sales. We have the customer support. We have the designers. Let's just buy this company and then apply it to all these other geographic regions. So in that phase, they're going to value your business differently. Because again, they're thinking about the future value. So in a strategic, you likely, the reason you go to a strategic is because you can do better in the value. So you might say like, all right, you could pay me 3x EBITDA in the math I did earlier, which was like 300,000 times 3, 900,000. You pay me 900,000 for my business. But I know you're going to leverage that to like, 10x what we do in year one. So I'm not going to accept 3x EBITDA. I want a 10x on my EBITDA because I know how much more money. And then you say, okay, that's a $3 million acquisition. The parent company is still going to make $10 million bucks on that anyway. So they still feel good about the multiple and everyone wins. So you kind of have to know who your buyer is and what they're going to do with your company. And then you can kind of work backwards. And there's all different, ways that this could play out. So that's just a couple examples.
For sure. And that was well explained. But after the PE company like buys it and tries to juice up the price, they sell it to another private equity
PE,
company.
yeah. Usually they call it turning the business. So you get another turn on the business. And there's just so there's what the investors have theses is what they're called, right? So they have a thesis in which they invest under. And a private equity group says, we invest in service industry companies, right? So like marketing agencies, like environmental consulting agencies, service-based industries. We understand this corner of the market really well. And we understand how to take companies from 3 million in revenue to 10 million in revenue. We're exceptional at that growth phase. So that's the companies that we buy and take. Now, the next phase of private equity is like, we focus on service industry companies, but we know really well how to take a company from 10 million to 100 million. And again, there's a lot that goes on. It's not just like, I took this already operating company, I didn't change anything, and we 10x their revenue.
Yeah.
They understand the levers to pull, who to combine, what executives they need to add, what relationships are going to matter. They understand. I don't understand. That's why I'm not in growth-based private equity. But they understand all those metrics. And they focus on that tier. So they don't buy the first turn companies. They buy the second turn companies. And then there's companies that do 100 million to a billion, right? And they focus on that phase of business. And then after that, a lot of it is going IPO. So then a private equity group might sell it to the public market. So it goes from private to public. And some companies go from VC track to IPO. Some go 3 turns to IPO. Some just, become just a portfolio company that churns and is leveraged to help other capital, return to the investors. They all have their different theses. And that is, like, so some private equity groups do hold longer and there is a return, like a capital return, and it's more like an investment fund, right? So what you have to understand, this is an interesting concept too, an institutional investor has investors, right? So a VC firm, a venture capital firm has LPs. So they're getting institutions. So maybe it's a retirement fund of a law firm, and a huge law firm has a giant investment fund for the retirement, and they might put 401k money together, they might do public stocks, and then they're going to do some private investing, and they trust someone in the space. So like, I mentioned TLTF, another one that we work with is Serenity Partners, and they had LPs that were law firms. So they were like, we look for legal tech companies that we can invest in who our LPs would use your software. So it's like, as they're spending money on your software, they're growing in the capital that they invested too, right? So there's like a strategy behind it. So in any event, those investors have a different reason for investing in each of those financial institutions. So there might be a PE group who's a mid-phase or growth phase PE group that literally is a capital return at a higher rate than S&P 500, right? So you might bet in the S&P 500 and you expect a certain raise, and over 30 years you're going to get, or not raise, return. Over 30 years you should expect a certain return, and you invest in it your whole life, and when you retire you have that money. Where someone with more money typically will want to diversify their investments, so they might invest into a PE group with like, hey, instead of this percent growth every year, I want it to be a little bit higher than that. Obviously, it comes with risk, because if a PE doesn't hit their numbers, like if the company they acquire doesn't pan out, there is a higher level of risk. It's more of an operational risk. There's a lot of different things that can go wrong when you're a private company than like a public company per se. So there's different reasons, but generally it's return, or you're looking for a certain ROI on your return on your investment on an annual basis.
There's levels to the game. That's crazy.
Levels of the game, yeah. And I'm probably speaking out of turn. So if any PE advisors or managers are listening to this, they're going to be like, "You're wrong." Like 4 out of the 10 things you just said. So I'm not giving financial advice here. Caveat.
Exactly.
Caveat.
And that's not really the audience we have, so maybe not yet. We'll see. But going back to business, we could wrap things up soon. But a couple more questions I have are your personal experience and lessons you've learned throughout the years of business. So if you had to pick, I know it's a tough question to ask, if you had to pick some of the best like lessons that you've learned through business, what would you say they are?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to go with one that's more hypothetical first, not hypothetical, but philosophical. That's the word I'm looking for. And it's a concept in life that once I figured this out, it made me a happy person, right? And everyone struggles with happiness, myself included at times. And being happy more times than not is definitely the goal for me in life. And money doesn't buy happiness, but it sure makes it easier, right? It's kind of like a joke that goes on around some of my friends in my circle. But it's this concept of perspective. And everyone has a perspective. And your perspective will drive some of your happiness or dissatisfactory or satisfaction, etc. And I think about my life as like a sine wave. And that sine wave has peaks and troughs. And it's ups and downs all the time, right? And on a sine wave, there's a baseline, which is essentially the average between the peak and the trough, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about that concept of highs and lows repeating over time, and then, a sine wave has a element of time, like over time, right? And you put your life on that timeline, I promise you, when you look back, you'll see highs and lows. And the period, so the distance between those highs and lows varies, right? So it might be a really big high and a really big low really close together. Those highs might span time, the lows may span time, but ultimately there is a flux, right? And if you can keep that baseline, this is mathematically incorrect, but if you can keep that baseline heading north, then mathematically it stays flat. But if you can keep that baseline heading north, you're doing really well. And the perspective is you're on this flow. And when you are celebrating a win, you need to understand that that win is temporary and you will go back down. Because if you think this is your new tier, you will be vastly disappointed when it goes down. But if you can celebrate a win and be like, this feels amazing, I'm in this moment, I'm excited, everything's going well, but this will not last forever, and I should just enjoy it while it's here, but also be aware that when it changes, that change isn't forever either. So you might be riding this fucking high for 2 years, a year, 2 months, 2 minutes, whatever the time frame is, and it drops off and you hit a low and you're like, damn, this sucks, right? There is something that is terrible going on in my life, whatever it is. And then you need to reflect and like be present there and realize like there's probably a reason you got here, number one, so you should reflect on that. But also understand that this isn't permanent either, that you will climb and rise again. And that low, unfortunately, might last 2 minutes, 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. But if you can have the perspective that I'm only where I am in a temporary state and always try to look up and find those next highs, you will climb out of that low and you will find a new high. But I think that the lows hurt a lot less when you know that the high you were on was temporary and you can get there again. And as long as you're just slowly, steadily making a growth across your life, and again, that could be, my business partner has some funny terms, but it could be in love, luck, or business, right? And all those things could be real, right? I know like we're different phases of our lives. I'm married. I've been married for a long time. My parents just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary last week, which is nuts, right? And when I was talking about it, I was reflecting and saying like the reality of a marriage is it's not going to be fucking awesome all the time. It's just like any interpersonal relationship is going to have hiccups And it could just be other external stresses on your lives that apprise internal stress. Whatever it is, that is going to go through highs and lows. And as long as, like, my wife and I's marriage is getting stronger every year, and we go through ups and downs, and sometimes those ups and downs last days, sometimes they're months, but you know that it's going in a positive direction, and we're both in it forever, so that's a good place to be. In business, it's the same thing. You know, we have a huge windfall, a big thing happens, and we get so excited, and then, like, you take a L sometimes, and you're like, fuck, that hurts. But if both of those times you just realize you're on this path, and then, you know, luck is the same way. Sometimes you get super lucky with things, sometimes you don't, and you can't control any of it. You can't control love, luck, or business. You just need to try to ride the wave and do everything you can. So I think perspective is so important, because it's so easy to get down on yourself. And it's also so easy to think that you're fucking God when you're on a rise. Like, everyone thinks they're Superman when they're Superman, and they all think that, like, they're going to end up homeless and broke when they're on this downstroke. And neither of those things are true. You're somewhere in the middle. So just look up from the bottom and look down from the top and find that medium path, and enjoy the ride as you go.
Well said.
That's my favorite mantra to live by, I think. And again, I base it off happiness, and every part of your life kind of contribute to your happiness. But if you're like, I only am happy when I'm winning, fuck, you're not going to be happy all the time, you know? I can find happiness at the bottom. I can hit the bottom, be in pain and suffer, but the minute I'm just like, yo, this is temporary, there are steps that I can take to get out of here, and I'm going to focus on those steps, and I'm going to smile while I do it, then I'm not so miserable. And then everyone around me is not so miserable, and everyone, you know, elevates everyone else.
Exactly. Are you familiar with Jim Rohn?
No.
Okay, so he's a speaker, and he basically says life is like the seasons. You know, there's 4 seasons, and it doesn't matter on the calendar what season it is, but your life is a season. So you'll be in winter maybe for 2 days, you know, and then, you know, like spring comes around, and then you're in summer. Summer could be a day or a whole year, and then just like that, you're back in winter again. So it's like the whole idea, like, don't let the highs get too high, the lows get too low, and everything's temporary. So that's
Yeah.
exactly what it reminded me of, which is
Yeah.
amazing advice.
Yeah, there's 4 phases to the seasons. There's 4 phases to this path too. You're climbing, you peak, you're falling, you peak. And that's kind of like winter being the one extreme. Some people love winter, some people love summer. So I'm not going to tell you which is which, but the fall is transitioning from one to the other. The spring is transitioning from one to the other, and you have a high and a low, and it's very similar concept. So that's great. I like that. That's
For
good.
sure. If you had to go back to when you first started in your business career, what advice would you tell your younger self?
I think this advice, number one, just understand that shit's temporary. I also would tell myself to buckle up. It's going to be a wild one. There was some specific advice I would give about understanding certain concepts, that, like, you know, doing a better job of doing some market research at times and not just jumping in head first all the time. But I look back now too and think, like, without those experiences, it's hard to have that hindsight. So, you know, more importantly, just understand that you don't know everything, you can't know everything, and just try to learn along the way, and, you know, enjoy the ride.
For sure. And travel.
Travel. Yeah. I got that out of the way early.
That story was crazy. I can't believe that.
Yeah, there's a couple others like that too. But yeah,
Off camera, we'll talk about them.
totally.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a great podcast. I'm cool with ending it there. A lot of great advice, good stories, educated me on the whole private equity thing, and I learned a lot. So I'm grateful for your time, and thank you.
Yeah, caveat again. Do your own research. I don't know everything there is to know about that stuff. Pick some buzzwords, use Google, use ChatGPT, and yeah, man, I appreciate having me on. These are always fun for me too. So I appreciate what you're doing. It's inspiring to see you as a young entrepreneur too. I know I've told you this a number of times, but you and your brother starting businesses when you could not drive yet, or you weren't even in high school yet. It was like super cool. It's something that I looked up to even as like an adult looking into that. I had a lot of other entrepreneurial ventures that I tried when I was younger with t-shirt businesses and other things. So you learn a lot from those experiences, and all those lessons translate forward. So just like keep trying, keep learning. And I'm enjoying watching that ride too.
Hell yeah. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
All right. Thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you.